A alien Beastwoman Alpha bites me during sparring. Now she says I'm marked. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Fred Carson's boots hit the floor of the underground pit with a dull thud. The dense mats, squishing under his weight, saturated with the sweat and blood of too many losers who thought they could muscle through the Xerxes 9 gauntlet. He knew this wasn't just a match. It was a message. The local merc crews didn't trust outsiders, especially not humans who showed up without backup or allegiance. He hadn't intended to be here. The delivery was supposed to be routine. Drop cargo, get paid, leave quietly. But someone backstabbed him. Someone powerful. Now the only way off this lawless moon was to prove himself through the pit, and the crowd above made it clear they didn't expect him to last 10 seconds against who they'd chosen. Across the pit stood Cybele. She wasn't just a fighter, she was a legend down here, an apex among aliens, her body covered in sleek charcoal fur, the silver stripe running from her neck to the base of her spine like a battle banner, her red eyes locked onto his with an expression that didn't show hatred or pity, just calculation. Her fangs glinted under the firelight of the surrounding torches, and her clawed fingers flexed casually, as if warming up for something she could do in her sleep. Fred rolled his neck, the nerves buzzing but not from fear. He'd faced worse odds during the border rebellions, and even if he'd aged out of peak form, his instincts were still sharp. What worried him wasn't the fight. It was the unspoken rule of this place. This wasn't about combat. This was about spectacle. The signal to begin came from a guttural roar overhead, followed by the banging of metal against steel. Cybele came at him without hesitation, not charging but moving with coiled grace, each step deliberate. Fred raised his fists, not going for flair but keeping his center tight, waiting for her to make the first committed move. She tested him. Sharp jabs with clawed hands, not enough to kill but enough to shred if they landed clean. He weaved, stepped back, countered with a hook that caught her shoulder. She absorbed it with a grunt and smiled. She liked the fight. She came harder now, a spinning sweep that Fred narrowly jumped over, landing with a grunt and retaliating with a knee to her ribs. She grunted again, this time not amused but interested, and her claws grazed his side in return, drawing shallow cuts. It wasn't a kill zone, not yet. This was still the dance. They circled. The crowd above roared, betting credits, shouting slurs, cheering for blood. Fred didn't hear them anymore. All he saw was her, fluid, raw, beautiful in the way. A storm could be beautiful before it tore down a city. Then it changed. She faked a lunge and closed the gap with shocking speed. Fred's guard was up, but she went low, knocking him backward onto the mat, and in a heartbeat she straddled him, claws digging into the fabric of his vest. He brought his elbow around, catching her ear, but she didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Instead, she lowered her head and sank her fangs deep into the meat of his shoulder. He shouted not in fear, not in defeat, but from the shock of it, the fire that radiated from the bite down through his chest. She pulled back slowly, blood glistening on her lips, and her voice came out low, fierce, almost possessive. Now they'll smell your mind. The pit went dead silent for a second, then erupted in chaos. Merc shouted some in rage, some in disbelief. Fred shoved her off, stumbling to his feet with one hand on his shoulder. He was bleeding, sure, but not dying. He glared at her chest, heaving. What the hell was that? Cybele stood with a calmness that made the chaos around them seem distant. You were marked. Now you're under my protection. They can't touch you. He didn't understand. Not fully, but he knew one thing. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was something else, something binding, and the way the others looked at him from the edges of the pit confirmed it. He wasn't just some outsider anymore. He was something claimed. Guards dropped into the pit moments later, not to escort him out, but to keep the others back. Apparently, the bite had triggered some law, some rule etched into the bones of their society. Cybele walked past him, brushing her fingers across the wound one last time. You'll understand later, she said. But for now, stay close, or they'll rip you apart the second you're alone. Fred wanted to punch something. Maybe her, maybe himself. He wasn't a possession, and he sure as hell wasn't going to be anyone's pet, alien or not. But he also wasn't suicidal, and whatever just happened, it bought him time. He followed her out of the pit, the firelights still flickering behind them, the metallic smell of blood fresh in the air. He didn't know what this mark meant in full, but judging by the way the crowd parted for Sybil and how they stared at him like he'd grown horns, it was going to complicate everything. Fred followed Sybil through the narrow passageways that tunneled behind the training pit, every step echoing with the distant roar of the crowd still howling over what had just taken place. His shoulder throbbed with a deep, knowing pain where she'd bitten him, the torn flesh already wrapped with a coarse strip of black cloth from one of the guards. He hadn't spoken since they left the ring, too focused on processing the fact that his entire fate had shifted in under 30 seconds, from a lone outsider fighting for survival to someone marked by one of the most feared Beastwomen on Xerxes 9. What unsettled him most wasn't just the bite or the possessive look in her red eyes, it was how no one else had dared interfere after she did it. Whatever the rules were down here, the bite meant something deeper, something binding, and he hated walking blind into power games he didn't understand. They reached a heavy metal door that hissed open at her touch. Inside was a dimly lit chamber with walls lined in rough stone and steel plating. The air was thick with the scent of old blood, antiseptic, and the tang of burning incense. A medical unit buzzed quietly in the corner, next to a low-slung cot covered in dark pelts. Sybil gestured for him to sit, and when he didn't move fast enough, she shoved him down, not harshly, but with enough force to remind him she wasn't asking. He grunted and leaned back, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle in now that the adrenaline was fading. She moved, with fluid efficiency, pulling out a vial of clear liquid and a cloth. "This will sting," she muttered, not waiting for permission before dousing his wound with it. Fred hissed through his teeth, gripping the edge of the cot as the burn bit into his shoulder. "Would have been nice to get a warning," he snapped, eyeing her as she cleaned the blood from his skin. "You needed the mark," she said simply, her tone devoid of apology. "If I hadn't done it, you'd be dead right now. You're human, outsider, and you bruised me in a public spar. The others wouldn't have let that slide." Fred scoffed. "So instead you claim me like I'm some damn pet." She looked at him, and for a moment the hard edge of her usual expression softened. "No, I claimed you like a protector claims someone worth guarding. It's not slavery. It's survival." She reached up and tapped 2 fingers against the bandage. "Now that scent is on you, they'll back off. They may not like you, but they'll respect the bond." He stared at her, struggling to find a retort that didn't sound like pure frustration. It wasn't just that he'd been humiliated in front of half the mercenary moon, or that he was now some kind of tagged property. It was the fact that, in some twisted way, she'd saved him, and he wasn't sure if that made him grateful or angry. "So what now?" he finally asked, pulling his shirt back on with a wince. "I sit in your shadow and pretend I'm your good little pet while you do the talking and I nod along." Sybil's lips curled into a smirk that wasn't exactly kind, but it wasn't cruel either. "You're no pet. You're my second now, at least until you find another way off this rock. That mark keeps you alive, but it also means you fight by my side." She moved to a wall panel and keyed in a command. A screen lit up displaying a star chart and a flashing contract beacon. "We've got a job, high payout, smuggling route escort with a side delivery, artifact run, simple on paper, dangerous in practice." Fred stood slowly, rolling his shoulder. "Let me guess, it involves someone who wants us dead." "Most things here do," she replied, grabbing a data slate and tossing it to him. "This one's no different, but it pays enough to buy your way off this moon. Clean exit, fresh slate." He scanned the job details, recognizing the coordinates. It wasn't just any artifact. They were hauling a relic from one of the old ruins north of the storm trenches. That meant black market value and, more importantly, high-level interest from some very dangerous players. He'd dealt with this kind of job before, and it rarely ended clean. "Who's our buyer?" he asked, looking up at her. Clients Anonymous paid up front in hard credit and fuel cells, she said, tapping a claw on the console. But they tagged the cargo with biometric locks. They want it alive and unopened until handoff. Fred frowned. Biometric locks on an artifact. Siebel nodded, her expression unreadable, which means whatever it is, it's not just scrap. It's something with a pulse. Or at least DNA. He let out a breath and leaned against the wall, absorbing everything. You sure you trust this gig? I don't trust any gig, she replied without hesitation. But I trust patterns. This feels like bait, but if we move fast and quiet, we might just outrun the trap. They stood in silence for a few moments, the hum of the console filling the air. Fred finally broke it with a sigh. You didn't have to bite me, you know. There were other ways. No, she said almost gently, there weren't. You don't know what it's like down here. You show strength, or you get gutted. That crowd would have swarmed you the second your back was turned, but with my scent on you, they know I'll kill anyone who touches you, and they believe it. Fred looked into her red eyes, trying to see past the warrior's mask. For all her bravado, there was something haunted behind her gaze, like she'd lost people before. Maybe even someone she'd once marked. He didn't know, but he knew one thing. She hadn't marked him out of dominance. She'd done it to protect something she thought worth keeping alive. He didn't thank her, not yet, but he didn't push her away either. Instead, he walked over to the gear rack and started checking weapons. Let's get this job done, he said, and after that we'll figure out what your damn bite means. Behind him, Siebel's quiet laugh echoed off the stone, not mocking, just amused, and maybe just a little relieved. The mercenary outpost's hangar reeked of fuel, metal, and tension. Fred followed Siebel across the metal grates, his boots clanging with each step, as a hulking dropship loomed ahead, patched together with parts from a dozen different makes, its hull scarred and blackened from too many near-deaths. The loading ramp groaned open as they approached, revealing the inside stacked with crates, secured weapons, and a narrow passage toward the cockpit. Siebel didn't slow down, and Fred didn't ask questions. He just adjusted the strap on his rifle and stepped inside. The briefing had been short and deliberate. They were transporting an artifact to the outer quadrant, away from the prying eyes of the mining guilds and slave or syndicates, straight through contested rebel space. Most freelancers wouldn't touch the route. Too many ambushes, too many missing ships. But Siebel took the contract without blinking, and Fred had agreed because she was right. The payout was enough to leave Xerxes 9 behind for good, assuming they made it. Inside the ship, a low mechanical hum vibrated through the floor. The artifact sat in the center of the cargo bay, secured in a magnetic field between 4 stabilizer pylons. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a small suitcase, but it pulsed faintly with a pale blue light and emitted a soft chime every 10 seconds like a heartbeat. Fred approached it cautiously, eyes narrowing as he studied the locking mechanism. Biometric seal, reinforced casing, unknown script carved along the edges. Definitely ancient, definitely valuable, probably cursed. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. The wrong kind of curiosity out here got you killed fast. You ever seen tech like this? He asked, glancing at Siebel, who stood across from him checking the pulse of the stabilizers. I've seen older, she said without looking up, but nothing this alive. She ran her claw along the magnetic brace, then tapped a command into the panel. It's not just tech. It's coded to something or someone. If the client lied about it being stable, this thing could go volatile the second we hit a spatial rift. Fred frowned, and we're flying straight into rebel territory with this thing humming like a beacon. She nodded, finally turning to him. Which means we stay low, keep the ship cold, and pray no one gets greedy. He didn't say it, but he agreed. The artifact felt wrong, like it didn't want to be moved. He transported dangerous cargo before, volatile plasma cores, illegal cryoclones, once even a live hive worm in a stasis tank, but this thing made his spine itch. Still, a job was a job, and he wasn't about to let second thoughts blow their only shot at getting out of this hellhole system. As Cybele moved to the cockpit, Fred followed, passing beneath flickering lights and exposed conduits. The ship was old, but it was fast, and that was all that mattered now. He settled into the co-pilot seat as she ran pre-flight checks, her claws tapping across the screen with practiced ease. They didn't speak much during launch, just exchanged glances and confirmed readings. Once they were clear of the hangar, the silence stretched. Not awkward, but heavy, as if both were waiting for the other to acknowledge the weight of what they'd agreed to do. It wasn't until they hit the upper stratosphere that Cybele finally spoke, her voice quieter now, almost distracted. "You didn't flinch when I bit you, Fred arched an eyebrow but didn't look away from the controls. "Didn't have time. You slammed me to the ground and sunk your teeth in before I could process it. I've marked before," she said, still watching the stars stretch across the viewport as they jumped into open space. "But you're the first who didn't try to kill me for it after." He let out a dry chuckle. "You expected me to stab you in the neck after you saved my life. I expected you to resent me, most do. It's not a small thing. Among my kind, a bite is more than a bond. It's a claim of responsibility. It means I'd fight for you, die for you, even if I didn't plan to." Fred turned toward her now, studying the tension in her jaw, the way her hand hovered slightly above the throttle, as if she needed a reason to keep holding back. "Why'd you really do it?" She met his gaze and didn't blink. "Because you fought me like an equal. Because when I looked in your eyes I saw a man who wasn't afraid of me, but didn't underestimate me either. That's rare, especially from humans." Fred didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure what to say. Part of him wanted to brush it off, call it instinct or survival, but deep down he knew it wasn't just that. When she'd pinned him in the pit, there had been a flash of something raw between them. Connection, challenge, maybe even understanding. And though she was sharp-edged and wild, he didn't fear her. He respected her. That scared him more than her claws ever could. The comms console crackled. A signal pinged from deep space scrambled, but unmistakably a scan pulse. Fred leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "We've got company." Cybele was already moving, shutting down non-essential systems and diverting power to the cloak array. Pirates or rebels. Could be either, could be both. Fred tapped into the long-range scan, a single vessel, small but fast, closing in from high-angle trajectory. They're trying to force a vector intercept. "We need to reroute." Cybele swore under her breath and flipped the ship 90 degrees into a hard bank, engines flaring. The stars blurred past them as inertia slammed Fred into his seat. Behind them, the artifact pulsed faster, its heartbeat speeding with the acceleration. Lights dimmed. Gravity fluctuated. Then the scanners lit up with a warning. Lock-on signal detected. "Brace!" Cybele barked, slamming the controls forward. A missile streaked past their nose cone, detonating in empty space, but the shockwave rocked the ship hard. Fred growled, slamming his hand against the panel to stabilize course. That was a warning shot. "No," she said, jaw tight. "That was a test. They're tracking the artifact." Fred's blood ran cold. They knew it was here? Cybele didn't argue. She just pushed the throttle harder, the ship straining as they darted into an asteroid belt. Behind them, the enemy ship followed. This wasn't just a high-value smuggling run anymore. Someone knew exactly what they were carrying, and they were willing to kill for it. The asteroid field was a graveyard of forgotten mining operations, scattered wreckage and jagged rocks spinning at impossible angles. Fred gripped the edge of his seat as Cybele weaved their ship between boulders the size of buildings, her reflexes frighteningly precise. The enemy vessel was still behind them, not as agile but faster in the open. Every time Fred glanced at the sensor panel, he watched the proximity warning inch closer. The lock, on beeping steadily like a countdown. The artifact in the cargo hold throbbed brighter now, responding to the pursuit as if it could feel the danger. That uneasy pulse vibrated through the floor, and Fred didn't like it. He'd seen ancient tech act up during combat before, but this was different. This thing wasn't panicking. It was preparing. "We can't keep dodging forever," Fred muttered, eyeing a thick concentration of debris ahead. "Either we lose them in the field or we fight." "We fight they breach the hull," Siebel shot back, her tone sharp but focused. "You want to test what happens if they get their claws on that thing? Because I don't." Fred ran a hand down his face. "Then we lead them, make them follow us straight into the worst part of the field." Siebel's lips twitched into something resembling a grin. "You want to play chicken with an asteroid storm." "I want to play desperate with the idiots chasing us," he replied. "They expect smugglers to run scared, not use the field as a weapon." Without waiting, she banked the ship left, accelerating toward the densest stretch of tumbling rock. The impact shields flared as tiny debris scraped against the hull, and the ship groaned with each evasive maneuver. Fred tapped into the rear turrets and readied manual control. If they got too close, he'd fire a spread and see if that spooked them off. But he knew it was a long shot. Whoever was behind that ship wasn't after credits. They were after the artifact, and by extension, them. Minutes passed like hours. The asteroid field grew tighter, more dangerous, and Siebel's piloting bordered on suicidal. Fred's stomach twisted more than once, but he kept his focus locked on the scanner. Then, finally, a break, an anomaly in the rock pattern. He recognized it from an old smuggler's chart. A hollowed mining tunnel cut through one of the largest asteroids, too narrow for most ships to navigate unless they knew exactly where to enter. "There," Fred said, pointing, "the shaft. It's a risk, but if we time it." "Hold on," Siebel interrupted, flipping the ship on its axis and thrusting down into the cavern with barely an inch of clearance. The enemy vessel tried to follow, but it clipped the edge of the tunnel and spun out in a burst of fire and metal. The explosion echoed behind them, rumbling through the asteroid's interior. They burst out the other side moments later, light flooding the cockpit as they entered open space once more. Fred exhaled, hands shaking slightly. Siebel glanced over at him, her usual bravado gone for once. "Nice call." "You too," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "You always fly like that." "Only when I want to live," she said, and for the first time he heard something under the sarcasm. Relief, maybe even trust. They coasted quietly for a while, setting course for a safe drift zone where they could regroup. Siebel diverted power back to primary systems, and Fred ran diagnostics while scanning for any remaining threats. The artifact's pulse had slowed now. Its glowed dimmer but still present. Whatever had triggered it during the chase seemed to have passed, but Fred still didn't like how reactive it had become. He stood and made his way to the cargo hold, staring down at the object with narrowed eyes. "You ever wonder why the client paid up front?" He called over his shoulder when Siebel entered behind him. "All the time," she said. "No one pays in full unless they're scared someone else will beat them to it." Fred nodded. "Or unless they're sending you to your death and want it to look like a clean deal." She stepped beside him, arms crossed, claws tapping lightly on her arm. "You think it's a setup?" "I think the payout's too high, the route too exposed, and the cargo too quiet until we got chased. And now that I'm starring at this thing, I get the sense it's not just valuable. It's important, maybe even dangerous." Siebel didn't argue. Instead, she stepped closer to the artifact and crouched, sniffing slightly, her eyes narrowing. "It smells old, not in the way tech usually does. Like ritual old, like it remembers something." Fred raised an eyebrow. "It remembers. My people believe some things aren't just machines. They hold memory, emotion, instinct. Maybe this is one of them." He watched her closely. "You sound like someone who's seen it firsthand." "I've seen worse," she said simply, then looked at him. "And I've seen people die thinking they could control something they didn't understand." Fred nodded, his expression darkening. "So we don't open it, we don't tamper, we deliver it and get paid." "Agreed," she said, then added, "but we stay armed until the buyer shows their face." He didn't argue. If anything, her suspicion matched his. This mission had become more than a payday. It was becoming personal. Someone had sent them out here expecting them not to come back. And Fred didn't like being played. He turned to leave the hold, but paused at the door. "Hey." Sybil looked up. "So thanks for earlier," he said. "I know you didn't have to take this job. You could have walked away after the pit. Let me bleed out." She tilted her head, red eyes softening just enough to show it wasn't all bluster with her. "I don't leave people behind, not anymore." He nodded and walked off, and behind him she stayed by the artifact, watching it pulse as if it were watching her too. Fred woke to the sound of soft chimes, faint, rhythmic, like a distant bell tolling underwater. For a moment, he thought he was still dreaming. Some leftover sound echoing from a memory. But when he sat up in his bunk and felt the subtle vibration running through the floor plates, he knew it wasn't a dream. The artifact was pulsing again. The soft blue light of the emergency panel bathed the small quarters in an eerie glow, and Fred swung his legs over the side of the cot, grabbing the pulse pistol from the magnetic strip beside him out of instinct. He didn't expect to use it, but after what happened in the asteroid field, he wasn't taking any chances with that damn thing humming again in the middle of the void. The corridor outside was dim, the main lights shut off to conserve power. Only the flicker of red safety lamps traced the edges of the hallway. The ship felt still, like it was holding its breath. As he neared the cargo hold, the hum grew stronger, not louder exactly, but deeper, more personal, like it was echoing inside his chest, not his ears. The artifact floated calmly between the stabilizers, its light no longer pale but richer now, glowing with a soft teal hue that pulsed in sync with Fred's heartbeat. He frowned, stepping closer. It hadn't done that before. It hadn't responded to him. That scared him more than any pirate or rebel. He wasn't alone. Cybele was crouched on the floor in front of the artifact, her back to him, her tail flicking slowly in a rhythmic arc. Her first shimmered in the low light, the silver striped down her spine, catching the glow of the artifact's pulse. She was watching it carefully, almost reverently, like it was speaking to her in a language only she understood. Fred didn't say anything right away. He didn't want to spook her, but more than that, he didn't want to break whatever moment this was. There was something intimate about the way she sat there, not afraid, not tense, just quiet, aware, and strangely vulnerable. After a while, she spoke. "It's calling," she said, her voice low and calm, like she was afraid to say it louder would break something fragile. "Calling to who?" Fred asked, finally stepping into the hold. She turned her head slightly, her red eyes catching his, but she didn't answer immediately. "Not sure. Maybe me, maybe you, maybe both of us. I don't know how I know that, but I do." Fred lowered the pistol. You ever seen anything like this before?" "No," she admitted, "but it feels familiar, like something old buried in bone, something instinct remembers, even if the mind doesn't." He moved closer and crouched beside her. "We've got 2 days until delivery. I don't want this thing doing tricks on the way in. If it's going to explode, possess someone, or start broadcasting our location to warlords, I'd rather know now." Sybil smiled faintly. "You think it's evil?" "I think it's curious," Fred said. "And that's worse. Curiosity leads to poking. Poking leads to opening, and next thing you know, we're hauling an interstellar plague bomb." She gave a low chuckle, then looked at him more seriously. "You're not wrong, but I don't think it's dangerous." "Not like that anyway. It's not afraid. It's lonely." Fred blinked. "You're saying it has feelings now." "I'm saying it's alive in some way. Maybe not like you and me, but enough to want something. And when you touched the console near it earlier, it shifted its pulse. It reacted." He rubbed the back of his neck, the bite wound still tender. "So what does that mean for us?" She paused, then reached out and touched the magnetic field with her clawed hand, just barely grazing the energy. "I think it marked us." Fred stared at her. "You think we're linked to it now?" "I think whatever it is, it chose us to move it. Not just anyone, us." He sat back, groaning. "Great. So not only am I marked by a Beastwoman warrior with claws and a territorial streak, now I'm tagged by an ancient piece of alien tech with emotional issues. She laughed quietly at that, genuinely amused, and for a moment the tension between them cracked. Fred glanced over at her. Her red eyes weren't just fierce. They were thoughtful, too. Sometimes it was easy to forget there was more behind them than just muscle and instinct. She was wild, sure, but not feral. She was calculating, smart, and maybe even wounded in ways he hadn't seen yet. "You okay?" he asked, surprising himself with the softness of it. Sybil blinked at him. "I don't usually get asked that." "Well, maybe you should." She looked away for a moment. "I've lost a lot of people, battlemates, kin. A few I thought I could trust. The bite. It's supposed to be sacred, but last time I marked someone they used it against me, left me for dead and sold my crew out." Fred sat silently for a while, then reached over and placed a hand on her shoulder. She tensed, not because she didn't want the contact, but because it startled her. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. She placed her clawed hand over his gently, grounding herself. When she finally stood, she looked down at him and nodded once. "Thanks." "For what?" "For not flinching." Fred smiled. "Getting used to you biting me. You're lucky I'm into the violent type." She rolled her eyes and turned toward the cockpit. "Get some rest. We hit the delivery point in 40 hours. If this thing wakes up again, I want you sharp." He watched her leave and then turned to look at the artifact again. It had quieted down, its pulse slow and steady now, almost like it had gone back to sleep. Fred didn't believe in destiny, never had, but this job was starting to feel like something bigger than a smuggling run. And if the artifact really had chosen them for a reason, he was starting to wonder what that reason might be and whether they'd survive it. They reached orbit above the rendezvous point with no further incidents, but the silence felt wrong, too quiet, too easy. Fred stood by the forward viewport of the ship, arms crossed, staring down at the small gray moons spinning below them. It was marked with old mining scars, dead craters, and buried transmission towers no longer in use. According to the coordinates from the client, the delivery was to happen in one of those forgotten stations, neutral ground, or so they claimed. No authorities, no syndicate presence, just a single hangar and a biometric lock system waiting for their cargo. It should have felt like a relief. Instead, Fred couldn't shake the sensation that they were being watched. Like the moment they stepped into that hangar, someone would be waiting with guns drawn and betrayal in their smile. He didn't say anything right away, but Sybil had already picked up on it. She moved beside him, red eyes scanning the moon with the same skeptical focus. "This place reeks of setup," she said. Fred nodded. "Everything about this job has been off since the start. No real name on the buyer, no specs on the cargo, no communication updates, even after a hostile tail chased us halfway across the sector. Now we show up, and the beacon just flashes green like it's been waiting for us." "I know," she replied, her voice low, "and I can feel it again. That pull from the artifact, it's stronger now. It wants to be here, or maybe it's afraid to be." He turned to her, concern in his eyes. "You sure you're okay? Ever since that thing lit up, you've been off." She shrugged, but her body language wasn't as confident as it used to be. Her claws tapped absently against her thigh, tail twitching more than usual. "It's like something's whispering to me, not words, just feelings, echoes. I've never had tech crawl under my skin like this, not even in war." Fred didn't pretend to understand what she was going through, but he respected that she wasn't trying to hide it. "We go in together," he said. "No splitting up, no blind trust. If something feels off, we abort and find another way." Sybil gave a short nod, agreed. "And if anyone even looks at you funny, I'll rip their throat out." Fred managed a faint grin. That's oddly reassuring. They prepped in silence, armor on, weapons checked, the artifact secured in a hover crate rigged with enough sensors to warn them if someone so much as breathed on it wrong. As the ship descended, the landscape came into sharper view, a desolate plain dotted with rusted towers and collapsed structures. The hangar sat on the edge of a ravine, its doors sealed shut but blinking with a coated light. The access was already granted. Fred's stomach tightened. It was too easy. But they landed anyway, locking the ship down and stepping into the choking dust of the moon's surface. Inside the hangar, it was worse. The place had power, yes, but no signs of life. The overhead lights flickered weakly, casting shadows along the walls, and the interior had clearly been unused for years. Dust settled thick on everything but one section of floor, a perfect rectangle swept clean, awaiting their delivery. Fred kept his rifle up. Cybele had her claws half extended, tension humming off her. They brought the crate to the center and waited. Nothing happened. No greeting, no contact, just the whine of old machines and the heartbeat pulse of the artifact growing stronger. Then came the voice. It crackled over an unseen speaker system, synthetic and male. "You've done well, Sybil of the Crimson Spine. And you, Fred Carson, the human who doesn't run. How curious you've come so far." Fred raised his weapon. "Who the hell are you?" "I am the one who hired you," the voice replied. "And the one who now relieves you of your burden. Place the crate on the pad and leave. Your credits have already been transferred." Cybele stepped forward, eyes narrowed. "You knew my name? My past? How?" There was a pause. Then the voice softened. "You were marked once before, Sybil. Betrayed. Left for dead. The one who did it now works for me." Fred saw it happen in an instant, her whole body locked up, claws fully extended, her breath catching just slightly, not fear rage, pure bone-deep rage. "You're lying." "I never lie," the voice said, amused. "I offered him redemption, he took it, and now he serves a higher purpose. As will you. The artifact you carry is not cargo, it is a key, and you, Cybele, are one of the few who can unlock it." Fred stepped closer to her. "Don't listen to him. We walk out now." But she didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the crate, chest rising and falling as if struggling to breathe. "If he's telling the truth, if it's him, I don't care if it's the ghost of your ancestors," Fred snapped. "This is a setup. That artifact is bait, and you were the damn hook." Cybele's claws trembled. "I need to know." Fred grabbed her arm. "You need to survive. That's what you told me. You don't leave people behind. Don't start now by leaving yourself." It broke through. She blinked, jaw tightening. She nodded once. Then, without warning, she turned and slashed the crate open. The artifact burst with light, a beam shooting into the ceiling and pulsing outward in a low, throbbing frequency that knocked Fred to his knees. Alarms wailed. The lights exploded. The voice screamed in static rage. "What have you done?" Sybil grabbed Fred, hoisted him to his feet, and bolted for the exit. "We're not pawns," she growled, half dragging him through the collapsing corridor as explosions rippled down the walls. The hangar imploded behind them just as they leapt aboard the ship. As the engines roared to life and launched them skyward, Fred gasped for breath and stared at her in shock. "You blew the whole thing," he said. "The credits. Let them rot," she spat. "They used me, used us. I'll kill him myself next time, rah." Fred leaned back in the seat, heart still racing, the artifact flickering now like a dying star. He didn't know who the voice belonged to. He didn't know how Sybil's past had been twisted into this mess. But he knew one thing with certainty. This job was never about the delivery. It was about awakening something that had been dormant too long, and someone out there had just realized they lost control. The ship drifted through the blackness of space, its hull scorched and systems flickering as it limped away from the ruined hangar. Fred sat in the cockpit, his hands tight around the flight stick, even though autopilot was already engaged. He hadn't spoken in almost an hour, not because he was angry, though he was, but because he was trying to make sense of what had just happened. Everything about the job had unraveled in a blink. The client had known Cybele, had tracked her, manipulated her, used her history and instincts to bait the trap. That was personal. That meant planning. And worst of all, it meant this hadn't just been about the artifact. They'd been targeted, not by chance, by design. Behind him, the hum of the artifact was now faint, no longer pulsing with that eerie intensity it had shown on the moon. Fred had taken it back into the cargo bay after the blast. It hadn't resisted him, hadn't flared or whispered or done anything strange. It just sat there now, dormant, like it had finished something, or maybe like it was waiting for what came next. Cybele leaned against the bulkhead a few feet away, her arms crossed, jaw tight, red eyes burning. She cleaned the blood off her knuckles from when she smashed open the crate. But the damage wasn't physical. Not really. He could see it in the way she stood, silent, rigid, like a coil wound too tight. Fred wanted to say something to ease the storm he saw building in her chest, but he knew better than to speak until she was ready. Finally, she broke the silence. His name was Threx. Her voice was low-controlled, but it cracked on the name. He was one of us. Same squad, same pit. I marked him once, trusted him with everything, thought he'd die for me. She paused, her claws flexing slowly. Instead, he sold our location during a siege, led the enemy right to us, watched them slaughter my crew, watched them collar me like I was livestock. Then he disappeared. Fred didn't interrupt. He just listened. When the voice said he worked for them, it wasn't a lie. I knew it was. She pushed off the wall and paced slowly, her tail sweeping behind her in sharp, irritated flicks. He always talked about finding power. Real power. Not just muscle or money, but something older. He used to speak about ancient tech like it was a god waiting to be awakened. Fred's brows drew together. So this wasn't random. He's been chasing this artifact for years. Cybele nodded, and he used me to find it. He couldn't touch it himself. He needed someone the artifact would respond to, someone with the right blood, the right instinct, someone like you. Fred said quietly. She turned to him, eyes fierce. They called me a tool, said I was part of a higher purpose, that this was fate. I don't believe in fate, Fred. I believe in choices, and they took mine away. Fred stood up facing her fully. Not anymore. You made your choice when you blew that hangar. You ended whatever game they were playing. Her lips tightened. Maybe I just lit the fuse on something bigger. He stepped closer. So what, we run hide? She looked up at him, and this time there was fire in her voice. No, we hit back. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Good, because I'm done running too. They returned to the cargo hold together. The artifact still hovered in its cradle, the stabilizers humming faintly. Fred circled it, watching it closely. If this really is a key like they said, then it opens something. Something they don't have access to yet. Cybele crouched beside it, and if it chose us, then we're the key to the key. He knelt across from her, his shoulder aching under the bite scar that hadn't fully healed. You said you felt it calling. What does it want now? She hesitated, then placed a clawed hand gently near the surface of the artifact. Her fur bristled slightly. Not from pain, but reaction. It wants to show us something, not here, not in this space, somewhere older, deeper. Fred raised an eyebrow. You get all that from touching it. She smirked faintly. Call it instinct. He exhaled slowly. Then we follow it, not for them, not for the credits for us, to find out what they wanted so badly that they were willing to betray you for it. Cybele nodded once. And if we find threats on the way? Fred didn't flinch. Then we finish it. They spent the next few hours recalibrating the ship's nav array, triangulating the pulse frequencies the artifact had emitted during its activation. Buried in the harmonics was a sequence, a coded set of coordinates layered in sound instead of numbers. Fred had to manually isolate the waveform patterns, but once the signature was clear, they found a destination. An uncharted moon on the edge of a dying system, far beyond known trade routes. No traffic, no settlements, just a graveyard of drifting rock and silence. Exactly the kind of place ancient secrets like to hide. Before they jumped, Fred returned to his bunk for a few minutes of silence. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about how far things had spun from where he started. He was supposed to be in and out, easy delivery, fast credits. Now he was sitting on a ship with a warrior who'd marked him, bonded to a relic that spoke in emotions, and heading toward something so old and powerful that people were willing to kill entire crews for it. And yet he didn't regret staying. There was something about Cybele, something beyond the claws and growl and territorial instincts. She was raw and wounded, but still standing, still protecting. And despite how everything had started, Fred wasn't following the artifact anymore. He was following her. He closed his eyes briefly, then got up, returned to the bridge, and nodded to her. "Let's go wake the past," he said, and with one push of the throttle, they vanished into the stars. The jump was long, rough, and quiet. Fred sat in the cockpit as the warp lines distorted around them, long strands of starlight twisting past the glass like threads of reality being pulled apart. The ship rattled with subtle tension as it punched through empty systems and collapsed space, each transition echoing through the hull like a heartbeat. Cybele hadn't said much since they charted the artifact's coordinates. She spent most of the time in the cargo bay, sometimes just watching it, other times sitting beside it, with her eyes closed, as if listening for something. Fred didn't disturb her. He could feel the pressure building around both of them, the truth at the end of this journey, the confrontation with her past, and whatever waited in the shadows of the uncharted system they were heading toward. He stayed focused, double-checking fuel lines, navigation locks, and emergency beacons that probably wouldn't help them if anything went wrong. The artifact had gone silent again, but that didn't make Fred feel better. It felt like it was waiting, not dormant, coiled. When the ship finally dropped out of warp, they arrived in darkness. The system was barely lit by a dying red dwarf, its weak light washing everything in a faint maroon hue. The moon they'd been directed to floated above a cracked planet, its surface fractured and lifeless like something had torn through it long ago. The moon, though, was pristine in a way that made Fred's skin crawl. It was too perfect, spherical, smooth, almost artificial. No atmosphere, no signs of life. But the artifact began to pulse again the moment they arrived, rhythmic, eager, the same way it had when they approached the hangar. But this time there was no voice on a speaker, no threats, just silence and gravity. Fred brought the ship down slowly, scanning every inch of the moon's surface for signals. They found nothing. No heat, no movement, no energy spikes except the ones coming from the artifact itself. Cybele joined him in the cockpit as they circled for landing, her eyes hard but calm. He could tell she was in control of herself again, her thoughts clearer now that there was a target in front of her. She didn't speak much, just gave a single nod when he asked if she was ready. The ship touched down on a smooth stone plain, the landing struts finding perfect balance on the eerily flat terrain. As the systems powered down, a low vibration passed through the ship's frame, subtle, like something massive, deep underground, had stirred. Fred met her by the ramp, both of them armored up and armed, though the tension between them wasn't about combat anymore. It was something else, something neither of them wanted to say just yet. They opened the cargo bay together and released the artifact from its stabilizers. It floated again, but this time it moved on its own, drifting toward the exit like it already knew the way. Fred raised his rifle instinctively, but Cybele put a hand on his arm. "No sudden moves," she said. "It's not reacting with hostility. It's guiding us." Frown, but trusted her instinct. They followed it outside into the red dusk of the moon's surface. The gravity was light, their boots crunching faintly on powdery stone as the artifact led them toward a jagged hill in the distance. As they approached, the ground began to shift, lines of light appearing beneath the dust. Ancient runes, barely visible at first, flared to life in the presence of the artifact. The hill split open with a groan of ancient machinery, revealing a staircase that descended into the dark. Cybele looked at Fred. Whatever's down there were the first to see it in who knows how long, or the first in a while who made it back out, Fred said dryly. But he stepped forward anyway. They descended slowly, the walls glowing with that same soft blue the artifact had shown earlier. The air was cold but breathable even without atmosphere outside, sealed by whatever old tech kept this place alive. As they reached the bottom of the staircase, the passage opened into a massive underground chamber. It was a temple, or something close to it. Huge pillars rose from the floor, covered in carvings that looked less like words and more like DNA structures, spirals woven into the stone. In the center stood a platform raised above the floor, and as they stepped closer, the artifact floated to its center and hovered in place. It pulsed once, then dissolved. Fred's breath caught. It didn't explode, didn't activate some defense mechanism. It just melted into light which seeped into the platform, sinking through invisible seams. The whole chamber lit up like a star had ignited beneath them. The walls pulsed, the floor vibrated, and a projection filled the air above them. A figure, tall, featureless, made of shifting light, stood before them, and it began to speak in a language neither of them knew. But somehow Fred understood it anyway. Not the words. The meaning. The figure explained what the artifact was, a genetic key left by an ancient race that had once spread across the stars, binding species through memory and blood. The key was never meant to be technology. It was meant to be passed, like instinct from guardian to guardian. Those who could bond with it were part of a lineage that had forgotten itself, and now that it had returned to the right hands, it could awaken what had been hidden. Lost archives, defense networks, warnings of something far worse that had been sealed long ago. Cybele listened with quiet fury. They used me to unlock this, not because I'm special, but because they couldn't get close to it themselves. Fred nodded. They didn't care what it did, just wanted the door open. The figure faded, and in its place, a new passage opened behind the platform, light flooding outward into a deeper chamber. Something waited inside, something neither of them could see yet. Cybele turned to Fred. "We go together." He looked at her for a long moment. Always. And this time, when she reached for his hand, claws and all, he took it without hesitation. They stepped into the light. The light didn't blind them. It wrapped around them like mist, pulling them forward as if reality were stretching itself open to let them through. Fred held onto Cybele's hand, not out of fear, but out of necessity. Whatever this place was, it didn't obey the rules of space. The tunnel beyond the platform defied geometry, curving in slow arcs that gave the illusion of movement while their feet remained grounded. The walls shimmered with holographic echoes of history, scenes that weren't shown so much as felt. Fred in before. It wasn't ancient in the crumbling, forgotten sense. It was rifting through the void, entire civilizations rising and falling like breaths in a sleeping giant. Cybele gripped his hand tighter each time the pulse of the place synced with her own heartbeat, and Fred could feel her energy rising, not with fear, but with a kind of angry awe. When the corridor finally ended, they entered a chamber unlike anything they'd seen before. It wasn't indulgent in the sponson of the crumbling, forgotten sense. It was preserved, living as if the walls themselves were awake and waiting. A domed ceiling hovered high above them, starscapes flowing across it in real time, a perfect simulation of the galaxy. Below, a circular dais stood at the center, surrounded by glyphs etched into the stone, each glowing faintly as the residual presence of the artifact bled into the air. And standing at the far side, facing away, was a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, familiar. Fred knew even before Cybele whispered it under her breath. Threats. He turned slowly, not surprised, not armed, not rushing to defend himself, just smiling as if he had all the time in the galaxy and knew exactly how this would play out. His fur was darker than Cybele's, thick and groomed with a burned scar running across one side of his chest. His eyes gleamed gold in the soft light, and when he looked at Cybele, he didn't show guilt, just certainty. "You made it," he said. "I was hoping you would." Cybele's stance shifted. Her claws didn't extend, but Fred could feel the tension radiating through her arm. "You lured us, manipulated me. You used our bond." "I gave you purpose," Threx said calmly. "You were wasting away in a pit picking fights with strangers, surviving on scraps and anger. But now, you stand where few ever have. You were always meant for this. I just guided you back to it. Fred stepped forward. Cut the theatrics. You used her because you couldn't touch the artifact yourself. Threx finally acknowledged him, tilting his head slightly. You're the human, the one she marked. Curious. I didn't expect her to bond again, but I suppose desperation makes strange bedfellows. Fred didn't flinch. I didn't need her to save me. I stayed because I chose to. Cybele moved between them, her voice a growl. Don't talk about him like he's a tool, that's your thing. Threx raised his hands in mock surrender. I only speak the truth. This place was locked to everyone else, but your bloodline it remembers. You're part of the genetic key, and the artifact responded to both of you because your bond is strong, not just instinct, symmetry. Fred frowned. What does that mean? It means, Threx said, turning to gesture at the dais, that only you two can activate the final sequence. This chamber controls something buried beneath this moon, a vault containing the last memories of the architects, their warnings, their legacy, their weapon. Cybele's eyes narrowed. What weapon? Not a bomb, Threx said. Not destruction, preservation, a way to rewrite decay, to restore what's been lost, but only those the system deems worthy can access it. The artifact tested you. It found you compatible. Fred shook his head. So your plan is to stand here and wait for us to hand it over? No, Threx said, stepping forward slowly. My plan was to awaken the chamber and be here when it opened. You did the hard part, and now all I need is your cooperation. Sybil laughed, bitter and sharp. After what you did, you think I'd lift a finger for you? Threx's face darkened. What I did saved you. You betrayed me, she snapped, stepping forward. Sold out our squad? Watch them burn. I gave us a future, he shouted, and for a moment the calm shattered. You think we had a chance out there dying for scraps? I joined something greater. The architect's legacy is the only thing that matters now. Fred raised his weapon slowly, and if we say no, Threx didn't flinch. Then you waste everything. The system will remain dormant, the vault will stay sealed, and eventually someone else, someone worse, will find it. Sable didn't hesitate. She walked up to him, stared him down, nose to nose, her voice cold. You don't get to act righteous, not after what you did. I did what was necessary, he hissed. You were just too weak to see it. Then she moved fast, fluid. Her fist slammed into his jaw, sending him stumbling back. Fred didn't move, didn't stop her. He knew she needed this. Threx recovered quickly, wiping blood from his lip, eyes gleaming with fury. You've grown, he said, but you still fight like you're trying to protect something. That's your weakness. No, Sable said, stepping onto the day as beside Fred. That's my strength. The glyphs reacted immediately, glowing brighter under their feet. Lines of energy traced up the walls, connecting to the starscape above. A voice filled the chamber. Calm, ancient, resonant. Not a language, a presence. Link confirmed. Dual imprint recognized. Guardian protocol initialized. Threx surged forward, roaring, but the chamber flared with a pulse that threw him backward, slamming him against the far wall. He crumpled, stunned, but alive. Fred kept his rifle trained on him while Cybele faced the light now forming above the dais. Images bloomed, data, memories, fragments of a long-dead civilization, their fall, the corruption that came from within, a warning about the cycle of power and the temptation to control rather than protect. Then came the final message. This vault is not a weapon. It is a mirror. Only those who see themselves and others will understand what must be done. Sable looked at Fred, then back at the light, then let it be done. The chamber accepted their command. The floor shook, and below them the vault began to open, and Fred knew they had just lit a fire across the galaxy that would not be put out. The vault opened like a blooming flower, layers of stone and light peeling back with deliberate grace. A quiet hum resonated through the air, not mechanical but harmonic, as if the chamber itself were exhaling after millennia of silence. Fred stood beside Sybil on the glowing dais, the projections of ancient stars still swirling above them, casting long shadows across the chamber walls. Below, the newly revealed structure pulsed with warmth, not the sterile kind that came from machinery, but the kind that felt alive, aware, and waiting. Inside were no weapons, no armies, no traps, just a singular core of pure memory, an orb hovering in midair, spinning gently, casting soft light across a platform of carved stone. Sybil stepped down first. Fred followed. Neither said a word. As they approached the core, it reacted to them, not with defense, but recognition. Two beams extended outward and touched them lightly on the chest, flooding their minds not with images but with clarity. The architects hadn't built this to control others. They had built it to preserve understanding, to remind future civilizations not of how to dominate, but how to coexist. This wasn't a weapon of force. It was a truth too powerful for tyrants to accept. Unity could not be commanded. It had to be chosen. Fred saw flashes of it all. Civilizations rising in peace, falling in greed, rebuilding only to repeat the same hunger. But the core held no judgment, only knowledge. It entrusted that knowledge to those willing to see beyond themselves. When the vision faded, he found himself standing in the stillness again, Sybil beside him, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to him slowly, her eyes different now, softer, grounded. "It never wanted control," she said. "It just wanted someone who wouldn't abuse what it remembered." Fred exhaled, nodding. "And we were the ones who got here. It wasn't just survival, Fred. It was connection, lever, but because we kept each other alive." Sybil looked down at her clawed hands, then back at him. "I've spent years thinking my instincts made me dangerous. That biting you, marking you, was just survival." He gave a small lopsided smile. "I've been bitten worse." She huffed a laugh and shook her head. "But it wasn't just survival, Fred. It was connection. I didn't know it then, but I know it now. The artifacts saw what I couldn't, that you weren't mine to use. You were mine to protect, to fight beside, to build something with." Fred stepped closer, lowering his rifle, his eyes locked onto hers. "You don't have to explain it, I get it, and I'm still here, still choosing you." She tilted her head, her expression unreadable for a breath, then softened as her claws curled gently around the back of his neck. "Then let me choose you back." Their kiss wasn't the rushed kind that came from adrenaline or desperation. It was solid, anchored in everything they'd endured: fights, lies, betrayal, survival. Her lips were warm despite the chill in the chamber, and Fred pulled her close with one arm as her fur brushed his face. She kissed like she fought, fierce, focused, and unwilling to leave anything unfinished. When they broke apart, they stood in silence for a long moment, arms still around each other, breathing in the calm that had replaced chaos. The vault began to dim now, the core sealing itself gently as if its task had been completed. A final message echoed in the chamber. "No longer a war." "You sure you're not just saying that to keep me from punching you again?" "Weapon, but in the right hands, it will always protect more than fear ever could." The passage that brought them in reappeared, and Sybil looked toward it then, back at Fred. "Time to go." He nodded. "Yeah, but not to run. We bring this to the right people, not syndicates, not tyrants. Just voices loud enough to share what's buried here." She narrowed her eyes. "You sure you're not just saying that to keep me from punching you again?" He smirked, little of both. They left the chamber hand in hand, the corridor behind them sealing once more. The artifact was gone, its purpose fulfilled. But the bond it had strengthened between them felt permanent. Back aboard the ship, the engines hummed with steady power as Fred set the course away from the dead system. No more contracts, no more double crosses, Just the two of them in a galaxy that needed more than warlords and politics. It needed truth. They had it now. As the ship lifted from the moon and slipped back into the stars, Sibyl leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder, claws tapping quietly on the console. "You think there's somewhere out there we can land and not get hunted?" Fred put an arm around her and pulled her close. With you next to me, I'm willing to find out." She purred softly, a rare sound, more vibration than voice. "You're lucky I like humans." He smiled, watching the stars stretch ahead. "You're lucky I like being marked." And with that they vanished into the dark together. Not hunted, not afraid, not alone. Just bonded by choice, by survival, and by something far rarer than war or victory. Peace.